How did this small creator make $1,200 off of photos she already shot? And this one made $4,000 off of raw footage he already took. But meanwhile, creators with massive audiences are struggling to get brands to even pay them to shoot. Free trade deals. And it doesn't even stop there, because here's another example where I charged over $27,000 more than my content creation fee for literally zero extra work. All right, so something doesn't make sense here. How are so many creators making so much money off of stuff they already shot? And no, it's not selling prints or stock footage. It's actually a much faster and easier option that most creators completely ignore. And yes, it is 100% legal. In fact, so much so that they'll slip it into the fine print just hoping you don't read it. So in this video, I'm going to show you what that fast and easy option is, how you can implement it for yourself, and some tips on how to price it. But before we get to all that, let me first just show you the reason that most people have extremely inconsistent freelance income, live a more stressful life, are slaves to low day rates, and then just ultimately fail, which obviously is horrible. We don't want that. So here we have two different creators, both of which were paid $2,000 to create some awesome content for a brand. And by the way, these M&Ms here, they represent your content. So creator number one got paid their day rate, but they didn't really read the contract and they just signed away everything. So it's kind of like giving away all your content in this open bowl. So the brand can just take any one of these assets, use it for literally whatever they want, and use it forever. Now I hear you saying, well, yeah, duh, they paid for the content, so they should be able to use it for whatever, right? Well, not quite, and we'll get to that in just a sec. Now, creator two got paid that same $2,000 day rate, but they actually read and negotiated better terms in their contract. So when they deliver the content, it's kind of like this locked treasure chest. All the content is still there. It's just that the brand needs a key in order to be able to access it. And here's the crazy part. Creator 2 can actually charge infinitely more than their day rate, depending on the value of the content inside this box to the brand. But I can hear it now. You're like, well, Nash, isn't that just scamming the brand? Because you're asking them to pay you to shoot content, but then you're also asking them to pay you to even be able to use it. So what's the point? Now, in order to explain this, let's look at a company that's doing exactly that model that you probably know yourself. Epidemic Sound. And just for the record, I'm not sponsored by Epidemic Sound. I know it's crazy because literally everyone is sponsored by them, but yeah, I'm not. Now there's tons of other sites that have a similar model to Epidemic Sound. You got MusicBed, Artlist, Motion Array. The list goes on. There's tons of them. But the basic concept is that they'll curate a bunch of assets, whether it's music or sound effects or stock footage, and they'll put it into a library, and then their customers have to pay a fee in order to be able to use that content for certain use cases. Now, just because you paid that fee doesn't mean that you all of a sudden own the asset, because you still have to abide by certain rules of the copyright owner in terms of where you can and can't use it. So in other words, when you pay that fee for the asset, you're not buying ownership rights to it. You're simply purchasing the ability to be able to use it in certain use cases, or in other words, it's called a license. So in our case, even though the brand paid us to shoot the content, legally they don't own it because they didn't create it. You created it. So legally, the brand actually has no right to be able to use that content unless they get you to agree to transfer the rights, the ownership, or the license, which typically you should charge for. So that sounds great for us, right? We just tack on a few $100, a few $1,000 maybe, and we can laugh our way all the way to the bank. Well, not quite. Because a lot of brands will take advantage of naive creators who are not aware of this by slipping in certain things in the contract that legally give them the right to be able to use your content without telling you. And this is really sneaky and really bad in a lot of ways, because they'll use these super technical words that people don't understand, and they'll just hope that you gloss over it and you're like, oh, whatever, I'll just sign it. And without knowing, you end up just signing away your rights. So in other words, if you're reading a contract and you notice certain phrases that I'm about to show you, then it's not you scamming the brand, it's actually the brand scamming you. All right, so now we got this dilemma. So first of all, how do we identify that we're getting scammed, or better yet, just avoid being scammed in the future altogether? Now, just a disclaimer, I'm not a contract lawyer, I'm not a copyright lawyer, nor do I claim to be one. So if you want actual legal advice, I can go talk to one of those people. But everything I'm about to talk about is from my own personal experience of working with Fortune 500 companies and their legal team and their contracts team. And it's just my experience. So again, if you have specific questions, you should probably go talk to a lawyer. All right, so how do we avoid signing away our rights, and better yet, be able to charge for the right to use our content? Well, there's actually 3 steps. Well, first off, we have to make sure our content's actually locked. We can't just give them an open bowl of content and just hope that they don't use it for anything, because to be honest, there's not much preventing someone from just grabbing this. So that's why the best way to lock your content is with a contract. Now, if you don't have a contract in place with your clients, I would highly recommend having that, because it's just going to make sure everyone's on the same page and make sure you don't get burned in the future. I've had plenty of times where I didn't have a contract and it did not turn out well for me. So have a contract. contract. Now, I'd always recommend having your own contract, which is kind of like this chest here, and you get to set the terms in the agreement and the price to be able to hand over these keys to actually unlock it. But sometimes brands will have their own contracts and they'll want you to sign that. But before you ever sign anything, make sure to look out for these key phrases. So if you see any terms like work for hire, or a transfer of rights or ownership, or a use in perpetuity, or a full rights buyout, or anything that's kind of similar sounding to that, in almost every single case, that means that if you sign that contract, the brand can use your content for whatever they want, whenever they want, for however they want. And again, we talked about you should be compensated for that usage, so never sign that contract unless you have full clarity on what the usage actually is. So you can think of it like one of those scams you see on the internet where there's like a ball under a cup and you got to follow it around and like pick which cup is under it, and like you win a prize if you do. But meanwhile, there's someone stealing your wallet from your back pocket. That's kind of like what this is, but instead of stealing your wallet, they're stealing the keys to your content. So if you ever see those kind of terms I just talked about, then never sign it and ask for clarification on exactly what they need. And then only when you're happy, sign that contract. And I'll see this all the time, especially for like free trade deals where brands will ask for full use in perpetuity, literally for free, which should cost multiple thousands of dollars. But people just willingly sign it away because they're not aware. Now, just to be very clear and fair, not every brand is out to scam you. Some of them genuinely don't know this exists. Usually those are the smaller brands. So in that case, just ask for clarification on where they want to use it, and then you can go from there. All right, so now that we've successfully locked this chest of value, we need to create some kind of agreement that once the brand agrees to it, we can hand them over this key so they can actually unlock the chest. Now, the thing about keys is they work in very specific use cases and only for certain things. So in this case, this key was made for this chest. So in the same way, in contracts, you're going to have a very specific agreement. So you'll have some boilerplate stuff like deliverables, timelines, expectations, that kind of stuff, which is always in contracts. But if you don't have it already, I highly recommend adding a license and usage term to your contracts. So this is where you're going to outline that agreement that the client has to agree to in order for you to hand over this key. So when we think about crafting a license agreement, there's really four main things that we have to think through. Who, what, where, and when. So who is just who has access to the content. So typically this is going to be the brand that you're working with, but sometimes you'll work with like a marketing agency who has a brand client. And in that case, you'll have to really identify who actually has access to use the client. So in that case, you'll have to identify who actually has the ability to access that content and use it, because is it just the brand? Is it just the marketing agency, or is it both? Another thing you need to think about is sub-licensing. So sometimes you'll license content to a brand and then they'll have the ability to maybe sub-license it out to like a magazine or something like that. So just make sure that you are very specific on who can use the content and who can't. The next thing is what. So what specifically are they licensing? So a lot of times on shoots, you'll shoot a variety of different assets. It could be photos, videos, all kinds of different things, and they're going to be used for different reasons. So in your contract, you want to specify which things are being used where. So let's say, for example, you shoot 20 images. They want 5 of them for a paid ad campaign and the rest they just want for social media. You'll want to outline exactly what those are being used for so that it's very clear. The next thing is where. So where specifically is this content being used? So if you're using it just on organic social, maybe you won't even charge a license fee at all because it's just, throwing it up on social. But if it's a national TV ad campaign, then you're going to charge significantly more because it's being promoted. It has a huge budget behind it. They're spending money to get these impressions, and just overall, it's a more valuable piece of content. And I'll get more into pricing here in just a sec, so just hang tight. Now that brings us to the last one, which is when. So when is the content able to be used? So some common timeframes are 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, and 12 months, or anywhere between 1 to 5 years. But you want to be very specific on that time length that they're able to use it. Now, another thing that you might find is that brands ask for perpetuity, which is just a fancy way of saying forever. So in my mind, first of all, I'd never try to license in perpetuity because perpetuity or forever is a very, very long time. But if a brand is just like adamant about doing it, I'm going to charge significantly more for that than I ever would for like a 5-year license. All right, cool. So now that we know the elements of the agreement, now we just need to establish a price in order to be able to hand over this key to the brand so they can actually open the chest. All right, so depending on those 4 factors that we just discussed, the price is going to vary drastically. So it's literally impossible for me to just give you an answer like charge $500 or something like that, because every situation is so different. But I will give you some general guidelines of how I think through licensing and some things to think about if you are met with a situation like this in the future. So usually I'll like to start the base price at the per content rate. So if it's a video, that would be my per video rate. Photo is a per photo rate. So that's kind of the base rate that I start at. From there, I ask myself, how large is this company? So if it's like a local company, I might not give any kind of upcharge to that. But if it's a national brand or even an international brand like a Nike or somebody like that, I might charge double or triple the amount of that base price because they are such a large brand and this is going to be far more valuable to them. The next thing is how much reach or how much money are they putting behind this content? So if it's just on a website, that's not going to be as valuable as something that is like a national TV ad where they're spending millions of dollars to run a campaign, or even like a social media ad where they're again spending maybe hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars to get behind it. So there's a few ways you can do this. One of my personal favorites is that you kind of set a performance fee based on ad spend. So say they spend $100,000 per month on the ads, you would charge say a 3% royalty fee. So that means that 3% of 100,000 is $3,000. So your fee for them to use it as an ad would be $3,000 a month in that case. Another way you can do it is just charge benchmarks based on how much reach the video is going to have or the content's going to have, or maybe the print circulation. So an example of this would be, say they want to run an ad and they're targeting 10 million in reach. You might just charge a base rate of, once you hit 10 million, this is how much it costs. If you want to hit 25 million, then it costs a different amount. So that's just some things that you can think about in terms of manipulating that price. Now, the next thing to think about is location. So the more locations the content's being used, the more expensive it's going to be. So if it's just being used on a website, that's going to be far less expensive than if it's being used on the website, plus social media, plus paid ads, plus over the top, plus in-stream, plus billboards, plus, whatever else, that's going to be far more expensive. So depending on how many places it's being used and how valuable those places are, you're going to be charging a different amount. Kind of a side tangent on that. If it's something where they're not putting paid ads behind it, something like a website or just like, stationery in a store, something like that, it's going to be less expensive than something that is an actual marketing campaign where they're spending money on it. And the last thing you want to think about is the longer they use the content for, the more expensive it will be. So if they only want it for a month, it's going to be significantly less expensive than if they want it for a year, which will be less expensive than if they want it for 5 years. And again, if they want it for perpetuity, usually I'll take that 5-year license and then multiply it by 3. And a lot of times that throws them off. They don't even want to pay it, which is great because I don't want to give them that license, but that's something to think about too. So that's kind of how I think about pricing. I'm sorry, it's kind of a vague answer, but if you want a more specific answer in terms of a number for your specific use case, I actually spent weeks putting together a pricing calculator for basically every licensing situation I can think of that's highly specific to commercial photographers. So if you're interested in checking that out, I have a free trial at the link in the description below. You can download it and use it for yourself. All right, so now that you know that you should be charging content licensing fees, it really doesn't matter if you don't have clients to charge to. So if you feel like you don't have clients or you don't have enough clients, I'd recommend checking this video here where I break down my entire client acquisition strategy.